In the 1470s, the Old Swiss Confederacy was drawn into the wider politics of Europe. The aggressively expansionist politics of Burgundy led to the termination of the long-standing conflict between the Swiss and the House of Habsburg. In addition, Burgundy's aggression against Lorraine and the Lower League, both allies of the Old Swiss Confederacy, and the ambition of the city-state of Bern to expand into the region of Vaud hardened the fronts between Burgundy and the Swiss. In the spring of 1476, Charles the Bold of Burgundy led a campaign against the Old Swiss Confederacy. On the 2nd of March, he clashed with the Swiss near Grandson. His army was caught on the wrong foot and soon turned to flight, leaving their richly equipped camp and their cutting-edge artillery as booty for the Swiss. However, the Swiss didn't exploit this victory and failed to take sufficient preventive measures. Only the Bernese placed a garrison of 1,500 men in the small but strategically important town of Morat, while the other cantons confined themselves to promising support in case Bern's territory was under direct threat. Soon, Charles began to plan his revenge. According to historians such as Christian Follini, the Battle of Morat was the decisive battle of the Burgundian Wars. It was characterized by a short Burgundian siege, many false alarms, and a quick and decisive assault of the Swiss relief army. This video is the third installment of a series on the Burgundian Wars and explains how contemporary historiography recounts the Battle of Morat. On the 14th of March, Charles the Bold arrived in Lausanne, where he reorganized and enlarged his army. During the next 10 weeks, reinforcements flocked to the Burgundian camp in the north of the town. Simultaneously, special attention was devoted to rebuilding the artillery, which had been lost at the Battle of Grandson. The army that left Charles's camp on the 28th of May was much bigger than the one he had commanded at Grandson. Charles was unsure which route he should take. Only when his army encountered a detachment of the Bernese garrison of Morat near Avanches did Charles decide to capture Morat, and thereby advancing against Bern, which he had correctly identified as the driving force behind the Swiss anti-Burgundian policy. On the 9th of June, Charles arrived at the city, and on the following 2 days, the Burgundians laid siege to it. Charles divided his army into 5 units, each having a different task. The 3 main units were placed in the south of the city, close to the Bois de Domingue, and were to be deployed in a potential field battle. The 4th unit, under the Count of Romont, and the reserve unit, under Antoine the Bastard of Burgundy, Charles's half-brother, were besieging the city. The center of Charles's array was his fortified camp on the Bois de Domingue, a wooded hill which dominated the area. Because the Swiss relief army was to be expected from the east, the Burgundians established a so-called Grünhag, a long-drawn field fortification armed with artillery. Simultaneously, Charles tried to secure bridgeheads at Arberg, Gümmenen and Laupen. Previously, as soon as Charles had been sighted near Morat, the Bernese, supported by Fribourg, Solothurn and Biel, had secured strategically important points in the vicinity and established an extensive network of scouts. Due to their good preparation, the watchful Bernese repelled Charles bloodily. Most fatally though, by advancing that far, Charles violated Bernese territory and triggered the defensive alliance of the Old Swiss Confederacy. While Charles was preparing his campaign, Adrian of Bubenberg had prepared the Bernese defense of Morat. He reinforced the walls of the city, parts of it are still standing today. And he also put up obstacles in the surrounding area and installed a strong artillery that mainly consisted of the booty of Grandson. Both powder and food were stored in generous amounts. While the landward sides of the city were fortified, supplies could still reach the city across the lake. Morat was well prepared. The defenders greeted the Burgundians with heavy artillery fire, inflicting heavy losses on the Burgundians. But since Charles thought of Morat only as a stop on his route to Bern, he kept pushing the attack, hoping for quick victory. But the defenders stood strong against the waves of Burgundian attacks. They pursued a very active defense by keeping the attackers in suspense with continuous sorties, keeping up heavy fire, and by repairing breaches immediately. Despite all this, the Burgundians slowly approached the walls. The defenders just managed to prevent them from entering the city, but they tired steadily from day to day, and the Burgundian guns damaged the defenses increasingly. However, remembering the massacre at Grandson, where Charles had executed the entire garrison after they capitulated, kept them going. They were fighting for their lives. On the 17th and 18th of June, the Burgundians coordinated 2 heavy bombardments on the city. It razed a part of the southern walls to the ground. The defenders mobilized their last ounce of strength to resist the 8-hour-long assault following the second bombardment. However, after this last effort, the Burgundian attack suddenly stopped. The Swiss relief army closed in and forced Charles to turn his attention the other way. Like at Grandson, the Swiss mobilization was late. On the 5th of June, the Bernese first requested support, but the other cantons hesitated. On the 13th, the Bernese renewed their request, and this time, the cantons of the Old Swiss Confederacy had no choice but to march. Because Charles had previously set foot in Bernese territory and thereby triggered the Swiss Confederacy's defensive alliance, the Allies had to grant the promised support. Soon, the first men arrived in the camp of the Swiss. The historian Claudius Sieber-Lehmann points out that in addition to the men of the Old Swiss Confederacy, troops of their allies, such as the Lower League and René II of Lorraine with his cavalry, were of great importance for the upcoming battle. In the night before the battle, the men from Zurich were the last to arrive, after an impressive forced march of 140 kilometers in 3 days. The men from Appenzell and St. Gallen, who were trying to beat an even greater distance, were late for the battle. All in all, the army of the Old Swiss Confederacy numbered about 25,000 men, including 1,800 cavalrymen, mostly from Lorraine, Austria and allied cities. The Burgundian army counted 23,000. While they were slightly outnumbered, they had more cavalry and artillery at their disposal. Charles wanted to avoid repeating the disaster he had suffered at Grandson. He wouldn't be caught on the wrong foot again. He carefully chose the battlefield on the plateau above Morat. This was an ideal position for his artillery and also provided an excellent ground for his superior cavalry. The Grünhag, meanwhile, protected the eastern flank of the Burgundian position, from where the Swiss were expected. On the 15th of June, he expected a Swiss attack for the first time and ordered his men to prepare for battle. After 8 hours of waiting, there still was no enemy army in sight, and the men were sent back to their camps. Charles gave false alarm 2 more times. Because of these false alarms, the men and their leader lost their immediate sense of alertness, and Charles became suspicious towards any news of approaching Swiss. He feared the Swiss might trick him into abandoning the siege. When the Swiss finally made an actual move, he reacted late. Although the Swiss troops from Bern and Fribourg had already made camp at Ulmitz, a place very close to Morat, 2 days earlier, he only reacted on the 23rd of June. He ordered his men to take their battle positions once more and wanted to examine the situation himself. However, it seems the lengthy reconnaissance he undertook resulted in a pretty shallow assessment of the situation. Charles only spotted a part of the Swiss camp, which made him believe that the enemy wanted to distract him from the siege with a small force. So, back to camp again, he sent his men, most of whom had been waiting in full armor for hours in terribly rainy weather. Although Charles was warned by his generals, he only left a field guard of 2,000 infantry, a number of archers and gunners, and 1,200 cavalry at the Grünhag. The next morning, it was still raining. The entire process was repeated once more. According to Christian Follini, Charles ignored all of the ever more frequently arriving warnings of suspicious movements in the Swiss camp. Only when the Swiss intentions were crystal clear did he finally give in. He commanded his men to put on their armor, but only to stand by in their camps. Just as half-hearted as this order was, so half-heartedly was it obeyed by the men. In the same night, the Swiss held a council of war and discussed the plan for battle. One of their main concerns was to avoid missing the chance of defeating the Burgundians once and for all. They didn't want to repeat their own mistakes of Grand Sang. Fittingly, the Tagsatzung, known in English as the Federal Diet of Switzerland, had passed a new army regulation. It prohibited making prisoners, because the prospect of earning a high ransom seduced many men to capture enemies and distracted them from the fight. However, the plan the Council of War agreed on was to kettle the enemy army in and grind it down. Defeating the enemy in open field would unanimously lift the siege of Morat. On the morning of the 22nd of June, a Swiss reconnaissance unit advanced towards the Burgundian camp. It noted that only the field guard was on their post. This very much suited the Swiss plans. During the following hours, they advanced to the forest east of the street Salvenachburg. There, they prepared for battle, under the cover of the trees. Here, a number of Swiss leaders were knighted. Around noon, the rain stopped and the men in the woods prepared for the attack. According to their plan, the vanguard, mainly consisting of men from Bern, Fribourg and Schwyz, and the cavalry advanced first to attack the Grünhag directly. As soon as they stepped out of the forest, they were met by a rain of arrows and bullets, which caused considerable damage. Their assault on the Grünhag soon came to a standstill. However, the men from Schwyz reacted immediately. They bypassed the obstacle on the right side and attacked the enemy from behind. After a long and bloody struggle, the Swiss took the Grünhag. The way to the Burgundian camp was free. To prevent the Burgundians from regrouping, the vanguard rushed forward immediately and tore down everything in its way, while the cavalry prepared to fight the Burgundian horsemen. The Swiss main force of about 15,000 men under Hans Waldmann from Zürich burst out of the forest just moments later and rushed along the right flank of the Burgundians to kettle them in, and then narrow the deadly encirclement step by step. While it is very likely that there was a rearguard, its task isn't mentioned in any source. Probably it followed somewhat behind the main force. Although alarm had been raised in the Burgundian camp, it was way too late by now. The Swiss had reached the camp, and the unprepared Burgundians had to fight where they were. Taking up formation was out of question. The Burgundians were overrun, and their resistance was desperate and in vain. Charles's cavalry was the only exception and gave the horsemen of Lorraine a hard time, until the main force arrived and helped driving them back as well. The first blow was quick, hard, and decisive. Charles was stunned. Together with his men, he turned to flight, unable to change the situation. It is said that it was only the fastness of his horse that saved Charles's life. While the advancing vanguard followed the fleeing Burgundians, the rest of the Swiss completed the enclosure to cut off the enemy's way. They met the lake close to Greng and Fou, and then pulled the ring tighter, while the Burgundians delivered a last desperate fight, trying to escape the deadly grasp. Only few escaped. Most were either butchered or driven into the lake. On the lake, 2 ships of Morat awaited those swimming for their lives. As soon as Adrian von Bubenberg saw how the battle was developing, he ordered a sortie. He attacked the men of Antoine of Burgundy southwest of the city and retained them until the encirclement was completed. On the other side of Morat, the men of the Count of Romont were not affected by the battle for some time, and even proceeded to shoot at the city with their siege guns. When they saw what was going on, they turned to flight and had to try to escape by muddling through Bernese territory to Romont. Only towards the evening did the carnage come to a slow end. The Burgundian army was completely destroyed. They had lost 10,000 to 12,000 men, while only approximately 410 Swiss had been killed. The booty found in the Burgundian camp was not as extensive as the one found at Grandson, but still formidable. According to the historian Claudius Sieber Lehmann, the Battle of Morat fostered the reputation of the Swiss as capable fighters and made clear to many European rulers that their armies, although mainly consisting of infantry, could keep up with most modern forces of Europe. The golden age of the Swiss mercenary began. Despite the disaster at Morat, Charles didn't consider himself defeated. He wanted to beat the Swiss with their own weapons, namely an infantry-centered army, and began to recruit once again. However, Charles had lost his authority at Morat, and many of his vassals declined to support him. At the same time, a rebellion arose in the occupied territory of Lorraine, and one after another, the Burgundian garrisons fell. Charles had no choice but to take care of this vital problem first. He immediately gathered the rest of his army to quell the revolt as it arose. However, René II of Lorraine and his Swiss allies were ready to interfere with Charles's plan once more.